Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on blockchain. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith and Professor Rob. First, I would like to give chance Professor David Smith.
Sharif, thank you so much. We're talking about blockchain today and what it is. And blockchain is a shared immutable ledger that facilitates the process of recording transactions, reading transactions, tracking assets in a business network. And an asset can be a tangible, such as a car, a painting, cash, land, or an intangible, such as patents, copyrights, intellectual property, and others. And virtually anything that's of value can be tracked and traded on a blockchain network. And like I said, it really is an extension of ledger technology that is brought to the internet in more of a mass scale. Why is it really important? Businesses run on information, and the faster it's received and the more accurate it is, the better. And blockchain is a way for delivering that information because it provides an immediate, shared, and transparent information on a immutable ledger that can only be accessed by permission network members. Now, part of the place that says permissioned network members is one of its greatest strengths and one of its greatest weaknesses. Because as you begin to look at that, that is a place where many people have taken advantage of blockchains and been able to compromise blockchains and break into them. But it's kind of there. But because you as a member can see the view of the truth, you begin to see all the details which are end to end. And a lot of the elements of a blockchain are things like the distributed ledger technology. And there's multiple approaches to this distributed ledger technology out there. And ideally, the transactions are recorded only once, really eliminating the duplication of all the effort that's in a traditional way of handling them. You also have the immutable records that when a party makes changes, they're seen by the other parties. And in that. Also, though, one of the key rules as you begin to look at blockchain is something called a smart contract. And smart contracts are a set of rules that's stored on the blockchain and it's executed. And it can define conditions for transfers, for others, and how that can be used. The blockchain works because it records each transition as a block of data, hence the name blockchain. And those transactions show the movement of the assets that we talked about earlier. And each block is connected to the one before it and to the one after it. And that way you begin to see some of the transparency. These blocks confirm the exact time, the sequence of the transactions, and they link them together to try to prevent them from being altered. And these transitions are blocked together in a irreversible change that is controlled by the majority of the people who are authorized in that blockchain. And that's one of the strengths and also one of the weaknesses when you look at that. There's a lot of benefits and others for it, but it's a trend that is here to stay. It's a fairly large market going forward with it. The blockchain market is about $10.2 billion in 2022, and it's forecast to really reach $1 trillion in 2030. So it's a fast-growing marketplace. All of the big companies are involved with it. Companies like IBM, Deloitte, and others have leadership positions in some of the blockchains. But it is a very good way to go forward with and to use across the environment today.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Professor Rob, what the interesting point you want to share with our audience about blockchain?
Yeah, I want to start off with a correction. The blockchain isn't a distributed ledger. It is most commonly used for a distributed ledger, but it's actually a type of shared database. And the way it differs from a regular database is that it stores information in blocks which are connected to each other through cryptography. And it can be either centralized or decentralized. In a centralized version, which we're most familiar with, as David pointed out, you get validators that exist throughout the network, and kind of everybody's involved in the transaction, and that's what assures the transaction is accurate. Blockchain is relatively secure. When you talk about security, no security is absolute, but it is more secure than more traditional methods. It is also relatively slow, which is why it's not used for stock trading. But it can be used fine for banking, and a lot of us have advocated it for voting, because it can be used to allow the voter to remain anonymous, but assure that the vote is accurately captured and recorded. It would be an ideal tool if we were ever to go to online voting, which I think, at least for me, would be a ton better than the crap load of mess we're experiencing here in the United States at the moment. So the use of blockchain has actually been brought forward through cryptocurrency, largely Bitcoin. But that's been problematic from the standpoint of power, because not only does crypto mining pull a lot of power, the use of blockchain by the crypto miners has proven to be a high consumer of electricity as well. And combined, right now the cryptocurrency market is pulling more energy than the Ukraine did before they were being attacked. It's a significant draw on the world's energy reserves. Some of the activities being handled through by using excess gas burn off of refineries and solar power, but by and large, from the standpoint of implementation of cryptocurrency, the use of energy has been problematic. Let's see. It is largely transparent. You can observe the entire sequence of transactions while leaving the participants anonymous. So you can see the record. That's very handy in terms of forensic analysis of a transaction, or if you needed to point out that something was fraudulent. Fraud is harder to do with blockchain because of the number of people that have to validate the transaction to make it work. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. And as noted, it is relatively secure. It was believed that illegal transactions using cryptocurrency and blockchain would remain anonymous, but law enforcement has been able to penetrate and identify the endpoints of transactions subsequently. So it's while it's used a lot for criminal activity, it isn't as secure as it once was for that activity, and I expect that'll continue to decline as tracing tools continue to advance. It's a significant change in the way we do things, and as David pointed out, when implemented as a distributed ledger, it can do things that a regular ledger cannot in terms of self-certifying what it does and validating the underlying transaction. So it's an amazing technology. It just has to be applied in the right area where speed is an absolute, and where you can handle a distributed environment, a distributed database like this, and do so with strong efficacy. So it's an up and comer.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Raymond.
Good evening, Sharif. Good evening, David, Rob, Willie. Nice to be here. As Rob was saying, this technology is fascinating, and it's coming in quite large, strong waves. Excuse me. And it is new technology, and it's not necessarily. It's obviously going to evolve over time as well. Yes, the security factor is really interesting, especially if we start to factor in things like artificial intelligences. But definitely, from my personal standpoint, I believe that it's certainly a step in the right direction with regards to being adding a lot more transparency to critical parts of society. Rob also touched on the elections, so electoral rolls not being able to be tampered with, everybody actually being able to have their vote counted, for example. It's obviously really significant in countries or continents such as Africa, Asia, Polynesia, Micronesia, or India, for example. So there's lots of real benefits there with regards to moving forward, and I think a lot of it, a big portion of it, is the one really important feature is that it is, say for example, there's a blockchain.
Hello.
Leaving us down towards a road which is perhaps not environmentally or sustainable or in the best interests of humanity. This is something that can you vote with your feet. Blockchain is tapping into more than a dozen different trillion-dollar industries. So if something's making too much noise, we can vote with our feet and we can switch and move to a different market. So I think in the end, the market will have an effect and be a lot more, make these businesses perhaps a little bit more accountable in the way that they do business. With regards to energy, yeah, certainly there is energy concerns, proof of work, which is what the Bitcoin or what the contracts use to mine Bitcoin and so forth to verify these contracts is significant. Does take a significant toll energetically speaking. Proof of stake is a way in which people are able to align themselves to a particular blockchain and use the power of their cell phone. I mean, if we have 4 billion or more people on the planet, many having more than one cell phone, this is an energy source that is greatly underutilized, certainly from what I see on TikTok. So I think there are ways around this energy shortcomings, if you like. For me personally, coming out of 2 years of pandemic, my business was dead in the water. Blockchain has been really interesting to be able to utilize or to maintain some sort of degree of financial security. It's really nice to be able to see payments happening in real time. I was doing work for an Italian company as an actor in March, and I have to wait 60 days. So in these times, 60 days as opposed to right now or now o'clock is a huge difference. And so I'm very positive about what's happening with the blockchain technology at this time.
Thank you, sir. Actually, I cannot hear you clearly. Mr. Willie. Mr. Willie Hill. Hello. Mr. Willie.
Willie, we can't hear you.
Yes. In that situation, Professor David Smith, I want to ask you a question. Let's say we are discussing about blockchain technology. Yes, this business is expanding. This technology now heavily using in different industries. What about the blockchain technology engineers? What is the presentations? How actually like these Asia Pacific people get more benefit if they become the blockchain technology engineer?
Oh, this is a growing market, like I said earlier. The actual compound annual growth rate of this market to the end of this decade is almost 86%. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities for both engineers, developers in this area. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for companies to begin to work with others to create solutions that are built around the blockchain, and a lot of opportunities for all levels of education to participate in building blockchains and how to implement them. The skills there are very interesting. One of the trends that VentureBeat just today was talking about is that the number of venture capital dollars going into blockchain has really accelerated. And you're seeing a lot more of that this year as it's beginning to be built into them and what it's doing. So, that's as a very good sign for your question of engineers and others beginning to look into it. And part of what you're seeing is that the implementation of blockchains, and as Rob mentioned earlier, there's both public and private blockchains, which are in the areas there. But even as you begin to look at where they are put and what they are doing, they can be implemented in many different areas there as well. Let me do this. I think you will see, though, that the players there are pretty large, and that some of the largest blockchain implementation of some of the North American countries are like where Raymond was talking about. There's large blockchain development groups in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in India, in all areas like that. And you're beginning to see the growth just really taking off in those. The skills needed for it are really very diverse, from engineers to security. Like Rob said, they are based on crypto. So you have cartographers there. You have the need to have a lot of security developers into it as well. So you really have a pretty full stack of the people involved. And that is one of the areas where a lot of opportunities, particularly in developing nations, to develop there. And Sharif, if you'll pop that graphic up from the studio, it really begins to show you the growth from today going forward. And you can see the growth is also in public clouds, private clouds, and hybrid clouds. So again, where it's implemented, how it's implemented is there. Now, you do run afoul of some of the data stewardship laws about where your data can be stored across country lines and others. And you do run into some of the privacy laws that have to be taken into account as you do this. But the number of partnerships being announced, the number of the other elements there, and it's not segmented to one industry. These are beginning to be used across all different industries. And you're seeing blockchain standards and others such as Imperium, OpenChain, Hyperledgers, and others really coming into place to handle that. The biggest growth area in blockchain right now is what they call their middleware level. And it is what helps developers build the application. And it helps you automate parts of it. And those tend to be industry vertical specific, like a middleware in healthcare, a middleware in finance, middlewares in laboratory performance, and in all the different areas. And in government services, there's middleware tools going there. And so I, like Ron, really believe that as you look at the future of government agencies, you're going to see more and more blockchain there. And And I think you will begin to see it used even in part of the balloting process, like Ron talked about. And I think we need more safeguards, and those need to be very private cloud type of blockchains for that, with some of the higher levels of cryptography. But I think that's coming. And as you can see by this graphic, it is a very, very fast growing marketplace. So Sharif, I hope that answered.
Thank you. Professor Rob.
Yeah. Oh, no question. All right. Let's look at the pros and cons of blockchain then, in lieu of a question. So the pros of blockchain are that it improves accuracy by removing human involvement in verification. That's important. I'm an ex-internal auditor, and the times I ran into fraud, generally, in fact, all the time, it's due to human involvement, lack of separation of duties, the typical issues that you have in an accounting environment that it doesn't have good controls. Blockchain corrects that by making it really hard to create a fraudulent transaction. Not impossible, but it's far harder. It's lower cost because it eliminates third-party verification, and third-party verification has been problematic to begin with. The fact that it's decentralized makes it much harder to tamper with. Because you have to tamper with it, you have to affect the entire ecosystem, not just a couple of people that are handling the transaction. Transactions are secure, private, and efficient. That's handy. You can keep the parties encrypted if they're committing crimes. Trust me, law enforcement can penetrate that encryption now. But for everybody else, it's much more private and secure than any other type of transaction you're likely to do. The technology is transparent, so you can look and see what happened and how it happened. And while there have been breaches of repositories, as soon as those bitcoins, when we're talking about cryptocurrency, as soon as those bitcoins are spent, you know that the person spending them is spending stolen bitcoins, and that does allow for recovery. And it does provide a banking alternative and a way to secure personal information. And if you've been watching how many banks got breached over the last couple of years, it's a kind of a showcase that when it comes to security, banks aren't exactly our gold standard anymore. Cons, because it's connected with Bitcoin, there is a significant amount of cost associated with it in terms of energy usage, which has been problematic. It has a relatively low speed when taken against other forms of electronic transactions, which is, as I mentioned earlier, is why it's not used for stock trading. You think it'd be ideal for stock trading, but stock trades happen much faster, and it is proven inadequate in terms of speed for those very high speed transactions. It does have a history of being used for illicit transactions. Using some of these tools can put a red flag on you just because they have been used for illegal activity in the past, and you might find yourself in a pool of folks that are considered that are under investigation for something that happened using the technology, which is a risk. But it's a risk in a lot of things. I still remember the time a bunch of FBI agents showed up at my door because I had a Class 3 weapons license to make sure I had been selling guns to terrorists, and the only one I've been selling guns to was myself at that time, so I was pretty safe. But it does showcase some risk because of the way the tool is used, and regulation is uneven over blockchain. It can vary a great deal country to country. Governments aren't exactly happy with systems that bypass them. Blockchain does that, and until it's fully embraced, some governments may look at it as something they should not allow in the country because they believe it's either illegal activity or anti-government activity that's occurring through them. And it's got data storage limitations. It is a database at the end of the day, and the size of the blocks is under dispute. And so that is creating data storage limitations to the technology, but some of that's artificial because of the nature of how the blocks themselves are defined. And as I mentioned, that definition is in discussion at the moment. Let's put it that way, as opposed to dispute. But in most cases, the benefits far exceed the disadvantages to the technology, and many of them, like the energy use, can be mitigated if you just pull it away from cryptocurrency and use it for other types of transactions. Cryptocurrency, by and large, has turned out to be a bit of a Ponzi scheme and highly risky. And blockchain preceded it. We didn't really learn about blockchain until after cryptocurrency, but blockchain came to be before cryptocurrency did. But I'm afraid cryptocurrency has probably done more damage to the image of blockchain than it is good, even though it's what really launched blockchain into the mainstream. So a very interesting technology, and I agree with David, a very powerful technology going forward.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Raymond. Mr. Raymond.
Yeah, just waiting for my mic to come on. Yeah, I agree. The problems with cryptocurrency, and it's a whole new world of bad players have shown up on people's doorsteps, and the ones that are using the DAOs, which are the third-party platforms or bridges to blockchains, are the ones that seem to be at the suffering the most with regards to the risk factor. Digital currencies such as the cryptocurrencies are definitely seem to be a lot more inclined to the volatility. I think a lot of this depends on the utility of the companies that they're being used for. I do see that there's lots of really interesting things happening with decentralized, tokenized property investments and these sorts of things as a way of sort of moving aside or moving into different asset classes aside from just cryptocurrencies per se, but different asset classes being trends or these transactions happening over the blockchain. Certainly very has been really interesting to see how they're beginning to be implemented more and more. For me, what really interests me is the idea of sovereignty, not just about currency, but of property. And so I think moving forward, a lot of the governance that's associated through different blockchains into different areas, whether it be electoral, whether it be to do with land. I see blockchain as being a way of resolving certain ongoing land disputes. But the governance thing is really interesting, where you can have a collective of people behind a certain idea, voting in real time in complete transparency. I think this is going to bring us all a lot closer globally, and it'll be really interesting to see how we're able to implement this technology as we begin to look at resolving the inherent problems that we have within different political structures that we're using at the moment. So, for me, the global governance thing, acting locally, thinking globally, this applied to the blockchain technology is, I think, going to be very interesting as we move forward. Thanks, Sri.
Thank you. Mr. Willie, can you hear me?
Testing, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I really like this concept of blockchain, but I'm sitting more on the topic of smart contracts, which is like a blockchain in essence. I'm looking at building equity crowdfunding using blockchain, sitting on top of blockchain, and sort of have been going around trying to get people to put the platform together. And one of the accountants came up and he said, you realize that the moment you do that, you'll be inviting scrutiny, especially from the tax office, because it'd be a good way for people to launder their money. And I said, okay, I didn't buy into that. I just bought into building an equity crowdfunding platform. So that just happened 2 days ago. I'm just sitting there, okay, how do I get out of this? But like you've all said, the concept of blockchain smart contract really sort of is in Australia. It's legal in the content that it's an asset class. And that's what I'm playing on. I'm playing, okay, if it's an asset class, that means I can invest in an asset class. But is it is it the current currency that everybody's dealing with? That's the tipping point. If I'm getting into equity crowdfunding, I need to be in an asset class that's favorable to everybody. And if it's going to be hijacked by some shenanigans of some people, um, the tax officer is going to be knocking on my door every second day. Can I see your books? Yeah. And that's why I'm just sitting at the moment, not really too sure about the whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jason, we are discussing about blockchain and you are young entrepreneurs. How actually the young entrepreneur, those who develop different kind of startup in the blockchain industry, they can be benefited and how the youth can create more solution for these industries.
Absolutely. Good morning or good evening, and thanks, Sharif. Appreciate it. So, yeah, I think blockchain and really distributed ledger technologies are still actually a very new thing for our society. They, in the grand scheme of things, they haven't actually been around too long, and I think our civilization still hasn't fully grasped what's really happening, and really it's this movement towards a digital world. So you can think of like before, years ago, you had different things that were physical, and eventually they became digital. And you can see that we're going to see that for every single thing in our physical world, and money and different IP ownership and assets and different things will become digital. And really the main breakthrough is that decoupling or really elimination of the intermediate step. So, like people have alluded to in the past, if you're doing a financial transaction, the bank has to go and confirm that transaction. And with something like Bitcoin, there's no central entity, there's no bank. So it's really the transaction is just confirmed without anyone else involved. And I think that's really the key thing, and if you think about like a smart contract where you've really gotten rid of so many different intermediaries. And I think that this is really, it's going to disrupt a lot of things. Some things we still want to have centralized, but I think that over time, a lot of businesses will be disrupted. And, you think about these new like IP NFTs and smart contracts, and really there's no limitation on what those can be. So I think for entrepreneurs, I think looking really at this point, it's more about building their skills, because we don't really know what's coming next per se. So understanding how smart contracts are implemented and deployed, understanding sort of the legalities behind them, and then related to DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations. These are still very new as well. I think that just kind of dipping in, but dipping in kind of slowly, because I think that there's going to be a lot of disruption and a lot of there's going to be, it's going to be a double-edged sword. There's going to be some controversy for those too, including with Bitcoin. I mean, you really have always had these two sides. Half the side saying Bitcoin should go to zero, the other half kind of saying it should go to $1 million. And everyone's usually in some between, and when they try to forecast where Bitcoin's going to be. So it's a new technology. I think it's good to learn about. It's good to really understand what can be done with it. So I know someone was alluding to like financing, which with equity financing or ICOs and these new forms of financing. And I think that is phenomenal. I think that's going to change the game of financing in general, because especially just the ability to just make these tokens, whether they're even, in some cases they're going to be IOUs, but really there's utility tokens, and then there's actual security tokens, and there's a fine line between those two, but really it's figuring out how do you use this new technology to advance your business or your goal, whether you're trying to raise capital or whether you're trying to really digitize something or automate something. So I think those are kind of the main things to consider. But in the age reversal space, there's already a lot of DAOs. You can see like Vita DAO, which has an underlying cryptocurrency. Kier DAO, same thing. And you know, for those, they're really young entrepreneurs using the new technology to then try to disrupt the status quo, whether it's raising capital as example, which, you know, the traditional venture capital firms are, so they're slightly different than that. And Vita DAO has been quite successful in doing that, actually. So anyway, that's a just short overview of my thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor David J. Kelly, can you hear me?
I can.
Mr. David?
I can hear you.
Okay. We cannot see you. Okay. Anyway, you know that World Talent Economy Forum, the open dialogue, what we learn, what we discuss in the real life through academy, we actually implement in Malaysia with our institution. We try to advancing our education system. Singapore and many countries from Asia Pacific, many institutions, they are joining. Especially one thing, I like all of our speakers, those who regularly discuss about industrial things. So blockchain is a part of industry. So let's say Mr. David J. Kelly, if we give chance to work as an academician for our Malaysian institutions, how you actually help this academy, definitely this is traditional academy, to integrate it more with this industrial technology, especially like technology like blockchain and AI, how we can advance our curriculums and our projects activities and all of our academic activities. And maybe you will be happy, like one of your session especially based on like academic like pros and cons, and we take it very seriously. Our academic team, we discuss all of your thoughts and we try to advancing the education system. Let's say our institution, we are now training drone pilot, AI engineer, cyber security expert. So how we can improve? What your advice?
Well, you know, without taking a detailed look at the how you're using it in a particular situation, from an academic standpoint, I think that these kinds of revolutionary technologies should be something that students are exposed to. My biggest problem, like when we try to hire, you know, a security architect or an engineer or whatever it is what they learn in school isn't really relevant. You know, a lot of times universities want to stay away from proprietary technologies or from this, that, or the other thing because it's, you know, either too new or too proprietary, and the problem is these kids are then not very useful, and a lot of companies, BCG just doesn't have the time to train these people from scratch, for example. I think that getting kids or students to do real projects with bleeding edge technologies and having maybe it's they need to have like mini courses in theory and application and a lot more of them, so there's a larger diversity of what they're exposed to, but having to do it in real world scenarios, as well as having many like these lectures in theory around the technologies they're using, especially with these revolutionary technologies that are really going to fundamentally change society. So, you know, blockchain, AI, and so forth. I think that kind of more hands-on curriculum is probably where you see the most benefit to the students, because not only do they focus on what the bleeding edge is, what the industry is doing now, but they actually have experience in context, and that's the kind of stuff that employers are generally going to be looking for as well. And it'll be easier for them to get jobs as well as immediately engage with the stuff that we're all working with. Does that answer the question? You guys can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can. Sharif looks like he's frozen at the
Yes.
moment.
Yeah, I just realized that he looks particularly frozen.
And next up would probably be Mark Lee. Mark, did you have anything to say about the topic today?
Talking about the blockchain, we were actually having this conversation on one of the other things that I've been involved in as well, which is a couple of things. One, I'm part of the Black Business Olympics, and definitely the part of the blockchain that deals with NFTs and the metaverse, which I know a lot of those are very much into that blockchain space, have definitely been discussed. And I think it was actually David that alluded to it, is kind of the educational training aspect of it. Because if you're going to be a developer, not so much a consumer, but a developer, you might want to have knowledge of certain languages that are not being taught as much as probably should be taught in our school systems. Not saying that they aren't teaching Python and Cobalt and some of those other programs, but I don't know that they're being taught as much as they should to give widespread access to those folks that might want to be developers, particularly those in minority communities and all along those lines. So I do know that that is something that I've heard people be concerned about, to make sure that there is diversity within this new developing industry. And it doesn't matter whether it's blockchain or whether it's NFTs or a number of other things. And one of the things that my artist friends are loving about blockchain technology is that it is supposed to eliminate the middleman and give them more of a direct access to their customers and all of that, without having to go through managers and agents and labels and a number of other things. And that's both in the music space as well as the filmmaking space, the book space, and a number of other spaces. And I've even heard people making NFTs, which are part of a blockchain as well, out of bloopers and things in that space. So who knows, maybe Sharif will make some blockchain NFTs out of what goes on here on the World Economic Forum and some of the very profound things we say, but also some of those bloopers that happen in any live stream space as well. So that is some of the thoughts that were immediately crossing my mind onto this conversation, because I do know that a lot of people are wanting to make sure that equity is a part of these conversations, and that enough people from various parts of the world, including some of the third and second world countries, are getting involved in a more active space than they have historically from other things that were rolled out in the past. So definitely, I'm glad to see some efforts to make sure that that happens, but I want to see those efforts continue, and for us to have more and more people learning about the inner workings, for lack of a better term, of some of the blockchain technologies, whether that's crypto, whether that's NFTs, or whether that's a number of other things that are in that blockchain space. And last but not least, let's not leave out those that are a little bit on the older side, because I know that my dad is an artist, and actually relatively well-known regional artist here in Durham, North Carolina, and everything. And I know that when I think of some of the NFTs, some of them remind me a little bit too much of the Andy Warhol type art. And while some of my dad's artwork may be abstract, he also has some very artwork that is more mainstream with some of his photography and some of the things that he does that is more realistic based. And some of the NFTs, not saying all, but some of those, and particularly those that get a lot of attention, are those that are a little bit more on the pop art kind of side. I know that a lot of people have been paying attention to what the Bored Ape Yacht, or Bored Yacht Ape, or something like that. I know Bored and Ape is in the title, and those are very popular NFTs that are out there and things along those lines. I don't know if any of my fellow panelists have any thoughts around that notion that of trying to make sure that as we do it, that it is not leaving out certain groups, whether that is minority, whether that is age-based, or whether that is a number of other things, and how some of these things are very pop-oriented activities that definitely the young people, my nephews who are 13 and 14, and even some of my friends that are in their 20s can get behind, but not as much those that are in their 50s and 60s, and definitely not as much those in my dad's generation that are now in their 80s and pushing near 90, and even some of those that might be in the 70s. But I'd love to hear folks' thoughts about that.
Well, I do have a couple of examples. You know, Mark, you brought up some great points. One example in related to education is like where they teach JavaScript, but I might need someone that does React specifically, which is in JavaScript, but knowing JavaScript and never having done React, there's a pretty steep learning curve. One point regarding age discrimination that you brought up is that I've actually noticed in very technical areas that it's starting to turn around where age discrimination is more reversed, because the younger people just don't have the ability to focus for long enough periods of time to be productive, especially with the hardcore engineering, and that applies to whether it's blockchain or hardcore in AI or whatever it is, and that more applies more in specific areas where that's like complex engineering problems, and that's where I've seen the age discrimination thing kind of slowly turn around, where they want people at a certain age with a certain, and it's not so much the age as having 2 or 3 decades of experience doing that particular type of thought process. And the other thing about diversity is I think probably the most important thing around diversity I've noticed is that the more diverse the pool of engineers on a particular team, the more ideas, and it isn't necessarily about race or religion or anything, but diversity of backgrounds that I think really allows the team to synthesize ideas on a broader spectrum and deal with a lot more complex problems easier, because they can come up with fresh ideas that are out of left field, and they happen to be great ideas and work better. At least that's one thing I've noticed.
Yep. Makes sense.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Sharif, thank you again. You always pick good topics. We have talked about blockchain before, and blockchain really continues to improve and advance. And like I said before, blockchain's growing so rapidly that there's just tons and tons of opportunities. And blockchain is an underlying technology that other applications can build up on top of, like as Rob and others have said with cryptocurrency and others like that. It can be used for inventory management. One of the applications that I'm seeing that look very promising, we're seeing colleges put their records on the blockchain for the students so that you don't have to go back and get paper transcripts and other things like that. So a lot of opportunities, a lot of growth, and your listeners and your students in particular should make sure they avail themselves of understanding this fundamental underlying technology. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Rob, what's your concluding remarks?
Well, I thought I'd answer a question to conclude. Willie brought up blockchain with regard to real estate and smart contracts. The company that's working on that is called DigiShares. They have a real estate focus, and their implementation is for crowdfunding for real estate investment funds and later stage startups. So it is playing in that area, and we actually have a company that's playing there as well. I don't know if it's the only company, but it's the only one that I could run into real quickly. But it's DigiShares, DIGISHARES. As noted before, blockchain plays best where transaction speed isn't the predominant deciding factor. It is one of the slower methods of doing a transaction. On the other hand, it plays best when you need that transaction to be secure, transparent, and open. And when used for real estate, it would effectively replace escrow as a way to validate the efficacy or the ownership of the land and the availability of the funds to pay for it, which could, for a lot of us, be a lot less aggravating if you've ever gone through escrow. It is a fun, lengthy process that sometimes doesn't work. So blockchain could be a significant improvement, and in that case, it would be substantially faster than the typical escrow process. So it has benefits, and everything's relative. It would be nice to, from my perspective, it would be nice to see it applied to voting, because I'm pretty much sick of this entire voting drama we're experiencing here in the United States. But the fact of the matter is it's an amazing technology, and one that is long overdue to transforming a number of industries. And I would include real estate into that group.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Raymond.
Yeah, thanks. It was an interesting session. Just to go back to what Mark was asking, I see for artists, it's I heard somewhere recently that this idea of firing your manager and artists becoming the CEO of their own brand, their own company, their own mark, and basically, I think with metaverse, different metaverses popping up, we're going to see environments where people are able to, dependent on their taste, their cultural background or whatever, they're able to go into a gallery which is more inclined towards pop art, or they might be able to go into something else that's a little bit more classical. And so you're going to have, just like any, like in the physical world, you're going to have people moving between different galleries, different, receiving different information, different inspiration. And so I think for artists, and particularly with music as well, which traditionally has been a horrible industry for artists to make a living from, I think it's really, really interesting seeing this take off. The whole Bored Apes Yacht Club. We have it graffitied on the walls down here in the next neighborhood. Like very, very lifelike. I'm not sure how they did it or why it's even there, but it's very very prevalent. It's becoming more and more prevalent. The NFT world is very, very interesting. I know on this coming Wednesday there's a meeting between BD Swiss and the G9main.net blockchain and Lydian.world, which is a metaverse. This, like BD Swiss is, I think, in the top 5, top 6 exchange houses in the world. So obviously that for them speed is key, and they're working over a broad spectrum of different markets. So I wonder if their new alliance with Lydian.world is going to mean that there's more technology that we're about to see come out that's going to speed things up. So it's a very, very fast-moving industry. Since I've sort of tuned into it 3 or 4 years ago, I've seen huge changes. Being able to purchase property, tokenize property in Dubai. I've been able to get into the NFT market. I have several NFTs. Still not quite sure what to do with them. Pretty to look at, but so is everything on the internet. This blockchain technology I've heard described as the internet on steroids. Mm-hmm. So we're not even over the first lick of the ice cream. There's a lot of things that need to be considered, explored, regulated, and it's a very, very interesting topic. So thanks once again, Sharif, for the invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Willie.
Yeah, I'm really one of the big takeaways from this conversation tonight is blockchain is not that really prevalent in this side of the world. So I'm looking at incorporating some of the smart contracts elements into the equity funding. But I'm just seeing myself backpedaling in that context. Yeah, I'd like to get more into the smart contract aspect of the blockchain. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor David J. Kelly, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Well, I think my concluding remarks would just to remind everyone about that blockchain technology, at least in my opinion, is one of the key technologies that will shape our future, and for lots of reasons, but it's important to be cognizant of how blockchain and AI and these sorts of technologies affect us. For blockchain in particular, there's I'm focused on the kind of resource management part of the use of distributed ledger systems, but with smart contracts and the application to governance and DAOs and digital currencies and virtual assets, a lot of these things that blockchain enables, I think it's important to be cognizant of all that, especially if you work in any sort of technology field.
Thank you. Mr. Markley, what's your concluding remarks?
Well, like I said, just in the brief time I've been here, great conversation. Definitely enjoy it. As somebody else just said, you always have fantastic topics. And definitely I've been looking at some of those things in the blockchain, whether it's NFTs or whether it's metaverses and things along those lines. So definitely looking forward to learning more. And as we continue these discussions around blockchain and other issues. So Sharif, you've done another excellent job and all along those lines. But I guess my one concluding remark, and this is for everybody here, I've heard that in this blockchain space, there are a number of people that are creating their own malls, their own islands, their own things of that nature. So Sharif and the other members of the panel, do you have any plans to have your own island and your own shopping center in the metaverse? That is my question to you, Sharif. Are you ready to have the Sharif Mall? And that goes for everybody else as well.
Yeah. Actually, in Asia, we do not like we are doing something in our own name. Let's say when I started these pot TV shows, I start Sharif School of Economics. But Asian people, they do not like. It's a different culture. But I can understand the American culture. So I think that we can start Mr. Rob's or Mr. David or David J. Kelly's or all of your name. We can use it. We can start this metaverse. So thank you everyone for excellent discussions. You know that World Talent Economy Forum, what the open dialogue we are organizing, what we learned, we implemented. In Malaysia, we already take a lot of actions to developing the new human resources. Singapore and Japan, they are also joining in between next 2 weeks. They will visit Malaysia, they will visit our institutions, and we will collaborate. I believe we have around 25,000 scientists from around the world. They are actually supporting World Talent Economy Forum beside Harvard University as well as MIT. Recently, we collaborate and we are integrated with their education system when we are applying their education system in Asia Pacific. And from next month, actually, we have planned to do more operations in South Asia. So thank you, Professor David Smith, Professor Rob, Mr. Raymonds, Mr. Willie, Mr. Markley, and Professor David J. Kelly for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. And we are trying to developing a knowledge-oriented society. It's hard, it's difficult, but not impossible. We need more of your support. With your support, hopefully we can develop next new world. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.